Secretary, Mayor, what are you going by these
Let's
days?
just go with Pete. I think
Pete? Okay, Pete, it's great to have you here. You're a few months removed from being cabinet secretary. You're off the hamster wheel, so to speak. What has that been like, and what are you working on right now?
it's kind of great. I mean, I loved my job. I love public service, but I also love just being able to drop off the kids at school or camp most days and just be a human.
You have
So,
4-year-old twins.
Yeah, they're about to be 4. They run up to bed every morning saying, "Papa, is it my birthday?" It's like, not yet, a few more days. But it's cool because this is the first time I think they really know that their birthday's coming up. They're super excited about that. They're going to be 4, boy and girl. And, in many ways, they kind of dominate our lives, as it should be.
And I imagine, like, you now get, how much more time do you get now than you did?
Oh, it's complete. I would travel when I was secretary. I was traveling at least, 1 trip a week, sometimes 2. Plus, sometimes I do a campaign trip. So I'd be lucky to be at home, 1 or 2 days out of the work week. And weekends were complicated too, as you might imagine. So it's really night and day. And as much as I loved my job and I love public service, I also love being a little more of a human, just slowing down, stopping and talking to people. When you're in office, there's a lot of like hurrying past people, which I hate. And now I just can breathe a little bit.
What's your favorite part of fatherhood? I mean, if you can
Oh,
name one. I mean, I have a 2-year-old daughter,
wow.
a daughter that's about to be 2.
Buckle up.
I was, I mean, we already buckled up like once she started walking. Like that was like sort of like I took for granted this, immobility.
Yeah,
But
they're actually more portable at 1 than they are at 2.5. But
Yeah.
You'll see. Have fun with that. It'll be great. No, I mean 2 is fun. 3 is fun because they start, like the words start coming, and then you can start really talking with them. I love how hilarious and absurd they can be. Um, how pure they are. Like they're just, everything is 100% with them. When they're upset, the world ends. But when they're happy, like it's just kind of pure. And they're excited about the smallest things. They find a leaf, Papa, I found a leaf. We could be in the woods, but like they found this leaf and it's the most amazing thing in the world, right?
Yeah. There's something we can borrow from that as adults, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one way I was thinking about it was like if we were for a Target, say, and if somebody like walking through the parking lot at Target spontaneously turned into a moose and like galloped off onto the highway, like they would be impressed by that, but that would not be any more or less amazing than the first time we let them hold a shower head on their own, and like learn how that works. Like everything's amazing to them, and everything's magical to them, and we could do a little more of that, I think.
So one of the things you've been doing in the last few months is podcasts. Politico wrote about it. You've done more than 24 podcasts. Some of them, a lot of listeners in the conservative space on the right, flagrant, pardon my take. Curious, your take on things, because one of the things, in talking to Democrats in Washington that I hear repeatedly is like, where is our Joe Rogan? Like, how do Democrats replicate what's been the sort of infrastructure of the right? What lessons have you learned by doing those podcasts, the conversations that you've had, and just sort of the new media environment?
Part of what I like about these podcasts is they're a way to connect with people who aren't necessarily looking for politics, but politics still matters to them. And that's actually why I think that the internal Democratic search for a Joe Rogan of the left is misguided. I haven't talked to him, but I doubt Joe Rogan thinks of himself as being of the right. I don't think.
Well, he was also a Bernie Sanders guy
Right, exactly.
not so long ago.
Yeah, and I think you got a lot of listeners consuming a lot of programming who aren't always out for politics, especially in these times when it feels like politics is always punching you in the face, right? I want to be able to connect with people who aren't necessarily looking for politics. Not so I can foist politics on them, but so we can have a conversation about what's happening and how it affects everybody. Because I've always believed that the best politics, like the best political communication, but also just the best way to understand what politics is actually for, is about everyday life. It should revolve around what it's like to be a human, what it's like to live in America. And it turns out everything in our lives, from, our family, in my case, our family existing, to having a glass of clean, safe drinking water in the morning, to the road you're taking to work, to the job that you have, the pay that you get, how safe you are. Like all that has something to do with decisions that are being made in Washington and in state capitals and in City Hall. And I want to have conversations about that aren't necessarily with people who already agree with me. So much of, especially in our media environment now, where you get this feed and all your feed shows you is like two things basically. Here's this example of somebody I already like looking good. And then here's this example of somebody I already don't like doing something that reminds me why I don't like them. And that's it.
Right. The algorithm has
Yeah.
like learned that like what keeps us there the longest is like things we love and things we hate.
Yeah.
Right.
Mostly things we hate.
Yeah.
And obviously that's bad for you. But what I think I can do is cross over some of those boundaries, those silos that have been created by our culture, by our politics, by the algorithm, and try to reach people who wouldn't necessarily get up in the morning saying, I wonder what some Democratic politician thinks of this idea.
What's your media diet like these days? Both traditional newsletters, podcasts. Like, what are you consuming these days?
Still read a lot of just newspapers and magazines. When I can, I try to get a hard copy because I've found even the same publication, it's different. Your eye falls on different things.
I was going to say, as a fellow elder millennial, Pete, we're actually only a few months apart in '82.
Oh.
Like, I remember growing up, actually not far away. I was in the North Shore of Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Like getting the copy of the Chicago Tribune on the driveway, picking it up. And I feel like we're the last couple years, if you're born in the early '80s, that was like the last time period where like you grew up still like needing to read that print newspaper.
But I think there's a little, I think it's going to be like vinyl. Like Gen Z, if you're watching, like bring back the newspaper.
I'm waiting for that trend story. Like Gen Z's rediscovered paper newspapers.
I think it's actually really healthy because even the app is more likely to feed you things that are just a little more, I don't know, a little more like immediate and shallow than some of the stuff.
Well, I worked at CBS News. Like that's what we discovered with our app is like, how do we keep you on the app for as long as possible? And that meant giving you more sensational and incendiary content.
Of course. And look, we as users like click on that. So we're telling the machine to do more of that. But I think most of us have a higher level of thinking within us that says, wait a minute, like I want to see things that I need to know, not just things I feel like clicking on. So I do that, I'm online a fair amount, but I try to keep that under control. I try not to be kind of always with my face in the phone. And I'm always looking for new forms. I didn't do much with Substack until this year.
Right, you have your own newsletter now.
Yeah. And I found that's a really good mix of, because it's got little short messages like tweets. It's got long essays like Medium or like a newspaper. It's got videos and podcasts. So I found that's a good kind of one-stop shop for somebody like me, both in terms of putting stuff out in the world and to get information.
Any favorite Substacks?
I did a thing with Heather Cox Richardson, the historian, recently. I think her stuff is super interesting. And just whenever I'm thumbing through it, I find new faces or voices I haven't heard of before.
You obviously were famous for one of the, I don't know many Democrats that went on Fox News more than you did.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah. And by the way, I got my start at Fox News. I was Chris Wallace's researcher at Fox News Sunday for a number of years, which by the way is his own unique environment within Fox at the time. What sort of reaction would you get from Democrats, from folks in the administration? Because certainly there are Democrats that have taken a much more confrontational stance for, obvious reasons with Fox News.
I think when I first started doing it, the attitude was, you can't do that. It's wrong to do that. You're like empowering a nefarious, corporation or something. To me, it was more like, I can't blame somebody for not embracing my view if they've never heard it. And so it's my responsibility to take it out in the world, especially to places that don't often reflect my view. And I actually think more and more the party came around on that. Really, you saw more Democrats.
What's the number one network, right? You have the most viewers.
I would draw a distinction between the quote unquote news side and the more opinion hosts who I didn't think were even going to come close to giving me a fair shot. But as a general rule, to this day, I'm willing to do that, take the message there, because I think it's important. I think there's more appreciation for the value of that now in the Democratic Party, but I also think we're a step behind again because a lot of the people that we're failing to reach aren't watching any TV. They're not watching Fox either. They're in their feeds. They're on the podcasts, which is why I'm doing so much more of that.
We're 6 months into Trump now. You've obviously been critical of a number of his moves. I'm curious, as you look at all the various things he's been up to, the 170 plus executive orders, DOGE, Big Beautiful Bill, rescissions package, tariffs, there's been a lot in these 6 months. Are there certain issues in particular that you've been most focused on or most worried about, given that you just spent 4 years in the previous administration?
Well, I'm worried about the massive transfer of wealth from the working class toward the wealthiest that is part of this budget, this tax bill, these slashing taxes for the wealthiest. Some people who are so wealthy they're not even going to notice the
Well,
difference.
that was just an extension, though, right?
And
Those are the tax cuts that already
well, it was
existed
both,
as
right?
of 2017,
It was
right?
both. It was
Yeah.
renewing tax breaks that were set to sunset, partly because of how they blew up the deficit. And it was all these new little loopholes and tax breaks that they created. And what they added up to was about $1 trillion more going to the wealthiest and an equal amount being taken out of healthcare for the poorest. Food aid, SNAP, I mean, stuff people count on to live in some cases. And, obviously I'm attached to the work that I did on transportation, pretty frustrated to see them killing safety related transportation projects because they hate diversity. I know that sounds like a big claim to make, but if you look at, there's a project on 6th Street in Milwaukee that was going to make that corridor safer. They went through all the requirements. I approved the project. And now it got stopped in its tracks because it was part of a program that included funding to make sure that areas that were cut off in the past or harmed in the past, often low-income minority areas, got the support that they deserved. Uh, for the same reason, they're killing a project in Toledo that is working on a high crash corridor. This project will save lives, and they're killing it. So obviously, I'm frustrated by that kind of thing. But bigger picture, what really concerns me is that a lot of people who count on support from their government to be able to get through lives, have a job, and take care of their family, and access the American dream are going to find the rug pulled out from under them. I think it's very revealing that many of those provisions, the ones that kick people off healthcare, are timed to take effect after the next election. I think it shows that these people who voted for it and the president himself don't actually want to be accountable for it because they want to have
Because they're
another.
concerned, like basically timing it in a way where it won't impact them for the midterm
Yeah,
elections.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they don't want to say, they want to make sure that when they're out defending their votes, people haven't felt all of the pain that these Republicans have inflicted on people. So look, we could spend hours talking about things I disagree with the administration on, but I'm concerned about that. And then beyond legislation, I'm really concerned about the chilling of freedom in our culture, the way they're going after universities, the way they're going after companies like law firms, the way they're going after journalists. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Stephen Colbert, who's one of the most entertaining critics of the government, loses his show at the exact moment when the corporation he works for has business before the FCC.
So you don't buy the argument that the show was losing $40 million.
We're talking about the top rated show in its format.
Yeah.
And for that to happen at the very moment that that corporation is trying to get approval from the SEC and trying to be on the good side of the administration, the idea that that's a total coincidence, I think, is pretty far-fetched.
So what do you make though of the fact that you got these law firms, you got the universities? I mean, certainly you're a Harvard alum, so I mean they've been very much in the crosshairs of the administration. Media institutions, so many of them cutting deals with this administration. When at the same time you've had a few law firms, a couple universities, and organizations who have been fighting in court and actually have seen some success before judges, especially those law firms that actually decided to push back. What do you make of just all these institutions deciding we got to cut a deal?
Well, I think the ones that cut a deal are finding that didn't really help them that much. Columbia University tried to cut a deal and they're still under the gun. And so part of the lesson is, you try to make a deal with the devil, like it's not going to actually protect you. But also these other institutions, and obviously there's been pain for the institutions that are fighting back. It's expensive and costly and tough to do what Harvard did and stand up for. But they're doing the right thing. They're saying like it's not okay to cut cancer research at our university because you feel that people who work at our university politically disagree with the government. And that's the thing, by the way, that I think most conservatives, libertarians, Democrats I know could agree on. Like we can be here and there on that issue. We could disagree on whatever, taxes, abortion, healthcare, but we should be able to agree that a university should not lose cancer funding or a law firm should not lose business because some of the people who work there are inconvenient to the people who run the government.
What do you make, though, of the argument from Republicans, from Trump, et cetera, that these institutions are out of touch with the American people?
Maybe they are. That doesn't,
Yeah.
they might be. That doesn't mean that the guy running the government gets to shut them down. That's not how it works in a free country. We don't get the guy in charge of the government doesn't get to penalize some private citizen or private institution because he thinks they're out of touch, even if he's right.
Having watched sort of how our politics have evolved the past couple of decades, what do you make of the move, the sort of distrust the American people now have for major institutions, this feeling of bias, this feeling that like they're elite institutions. And, you were talking about the transfer of wealth, with the most recent legislation, but the perception continues to persist out there that it's the Democrats who are the elitists in cahoots with Hollywood, the media, universities. And so there's a lot of rah-rahing, there's cheering out there against these institutions. What have Democrats done wrong, and what do you make of that
Look, I
perspective?
think Democrats have wrongly allowed themselves to look like the defenders of the status quo. And some in the party, I think, really do want to defend the institutions we had. I come at it differently. I think that these institutions have let us down. I think that if our political and economic systems were working just fine, we wouldn't be here. Like a guy like the current president wouldn't be possible if things were going along just fine. And some of these institutions, which were designed well by the standards of the 40s or 50s, have gotten rickety and aren't really meeting the moment anyway. And so, if and when Democrats come back to power, the project can't be to go back and tape together the shards of
By the
everything
way,
that Trump.
I'm going to stop you there. You said if and when. You didn't say when Democrats come back to power. You said if Democrats come back to power.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything is. We're past the point of just believing that there's some pendulum that comes back and forth, or some cycle that one party's up or one party's down. We're way through the looking glass right now. I think that both parties should examine the chances of their survival. I think Democrats should consider whether the party is going to survive being out of power this dramatically. I think Republicans should consider whether anything resembling the Republican Party could exist after the persona of Donald Trump has left the stage, given that he is the only thing holding together at least three factions in the Republican Party that are completely different. One of them is the kind of techno libertarians. The most extreme example of them is probably Elon. One of them is your kind of old school Republicans who like to cut taxes, cut regulation, cut government.
This is the Bush era Republicans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then one of them is these kind of fierce populists who are anti-corporate, in some ways anti-business, and also mixed up with white nationalism. Like these are three like very different, arguably warring factions inside the same party, which means that the party could well blow apart the moment that Donald Trump isn't there to personally hold it all together mostly through fear. So, 20 years from now, will we be a country of Democrats and Republicans taking turns on who's in power? I'm not so sure.
Well, it actually leads me to my next question. Over on our Instagram page for subscribers, I'm often asked, how worried are you? How worried should we be? America is about to turn 250 years old next July 4th. And so we sort of created an informal 10-point scale, like the worry about democracy scale. And they're like, Moshe, where are you at? And I'm like, I live at like a 3.5 these days. 10 being where North Korea, Russia, China, like it's the end of like there's no shot of coming back. 0 meaning we have no concern at all. For me, like if you pass 5, we're sort of closer to authoritarianism than democracy. I sort of catching you in the moment here, but like on that scale, like where would you put yourself right now in terms of your genuine concern for the state of American democracy as we hit 250 years old?
I mean, I think my needle is north of 5.
Is it?
Because I don't think we've been that great of a democracy to begin with, and that was before you got to the kind of autocratic nature of Trumpism.
So we were already in like the single digits, like over the course of the past couple decades.
Yeah, let me put it this way: like our government has struggled to be responsive to the people on some very basic things. We're the only country, literally the only one, that has a president and calls itself a democracy, where it is even possible that the person who gets less votes could get to be president and the person who got more votes would lose. That's literally impossible.
Right. I think Argentina had an electoral college at some point that they killed.
Yeah, of course they got rid of it because it's a crazy thing to have in a country that thinks of itself as democratic. Now, to be clear, this time he won the popular vote too, but just the fact that that's even possible tells you
right. Wait, it's happened twice now in the past 25 years, Bush 2000 and then
I remember learning about this in high school and thinking, wow, if that ever actually happened, we would get rid of the electoral college the next day, only for it to actually happen in the first election I voted.
There was this debate in the early 70s because they were fearful of the George Wallace election when he won 4 states in 68, that like there was actually, funny enough, the House passed it. Nixon was ready to sign the end electoral college. The Senate, it didn't hit the filibuster threshold at that time.
So there's a lot of this, and it's interesting. Our Constitution, one of the best, arguably the most important thing about our Constitution is that it has amendments that you can update the foundational law of the country. There's a high bar to do it, but it can be done. And some of the most important and best things that have ever happened in this country were amendments, including amendments making it more democratic, right? Saying that we get to vote for senators about 100 years ago instead of having legislators do it for us. Making sure everybody can vote, women, civil rights, all of that.
Those first
Um,
10.
the whole Bill of Rights,
Yeah.
right? Those weren't in 1.0. Those were amendments. But for the last 50 years, we've not had substantive amendments. There was one technical one in the 90s, but um, that is problematic. Another thing that we're the only one of is we're the only democracy that makes it as hard as it is here to amend the Constitution. I think that has caught us because the design of our democracy, the setup of our government, is just not responsive to where people are at. And that's how you get a collapse of trust in institutions. That and a lot of policy failure. I wrote a whole book about this called Trust about 5 years ago. Um, you know, our generation, I was about to say my generation, we're the same vintage.
Yeah.
Um,
Elder millennial,
yeah,
right? We're technically the first year of millennials, Pete.
yeah. So us elder millennials have seen a lot of policy failure. If you were born the year that my parents were born, you had a 90% chance of coming out economically ahead of your own parents. 90% if you're born in the 40s. For us, it's coin flip if you start the clock in 1982. Current young generations, it's not obvious that they have a better than even chance of doing better. Not even clear you can buy a house. Those things, of course, add up to a huge skepticism in institutions. Now, I don't think that means it's okay to turn around and put a quack in charge of the health department and watch measles come back because he doesn't believe in modern
I
medicine.
mean, you're referring to RFK.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or any of the other things that they're doing. I don't think the response to the problems of the education department is to get rid of the education department like Trump is doing. But I do think we wouldn't be here if these institutions were working.
Now, having been inside the government as a cabinet secretary, also famously, you worked at McKinsey, consulting firm that helps organizations, government, a whole variety of companies become more efficient, find cuts. We're watching Doge unfold in the government. How much bloat and inefficiency did you find within the government? How frustrating was it? What cuts were necessary? And what do you make of this effort, both good, bad, and ugly?
So the idea of making our government more efficient is a very good idea. Um, we need to find ways to make it easier to reward and hire good people and to remove people who are not good at their jobs.
Was that something that frustrated
Um,
you while you were there?
It could. I mean, I worked with amazing civil servants in the DOT, but yeah, definitely you couldn't just compared to the private sector or even compared to the city when I was the mayor of South Bend, you couldn't just say, oh, we need more people on this, let's hire them, or like these people aren't working out. It just was much more complicated than that. So I would be all for a process that made it easier to do that. But you look at what Doge came in and did. They fired a bunch of people for no reason other than they could. They didn't check which ones were good at their jobs and which ones were bad at their jobs. They didn't check which jobs were more important and which ones were less important. They just found the categories that had the least legal protections and got rid of them all.
That wasn't a process that you ran at McKinsey.
That was not how, yeah, I mean, no business would do it that way. People talk about making government more like a business. What business would just randomly cut a bunch of people without checking which ones of them were really good? And sometimes, remember, they accidentally or mistakenly fired a bunch of people who were in charge of keeping our nuclear weapons safe.
Right.
Over at my old department, the Department of Transportation, they got rid of a bunch of people who did technical operations for the FAA. Kind of important when you're having tech support issues at the FAA, as we have all since learned, right? So, yes, we need more efficient government. No, you don't just come in with a sledgehammer and just bash things and expect it to work better.
How much of a long-term impact, having been in there and now observing it, do you think this is going to have? One of the questions we got, we asked listeners for questions for you, and one of the questions I got from several folks was, how much of what Trump is doing right now, and we're obviously only 6 months in, is reversible by a future Democratic administration? How much of it is permanently altered how the government functions? And by the way, pending, let's say Democrats aren't able to win and Republicans win another term in 2029, what does the reality look like going to the next decade?
Well, this is where maybe I probably part ways a little bit with some of my fellow Democrats. I don't think the object of the game should be to reverse all of the things that happened, even though most of the things that have happened are bad. And what I mean by that is the status quo we inherited wasn't working. So take USAID or the Department of Education. Truth is, if you were starting over today to design something like that, to design a department that did those jobs, you would not come up with what we had in 2024. That doesn't mean that burning them down was the right thing to do. It was wrong to burn them down. But it does mean that our job should not be to reverse everything that happened tape them back together just the way they were. It means that we have to design new and better institutions. So I guess my answer to that question, my direct answer is most of what has happened is not easily reversible. But our project shouldn't be simply to reverse it because we cannot go into the rest of the 2020s with the setup that we built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and expect that to work, especially when you contemplate what artificial intelligence is about to do, is actually currently doing to our society, our politics, and our economy. My party, I think, is really underreacting to this.
Yeah.
It changes everything
Yeah,
in terms of how our institutions
you
should be
wrote
designed.
about it recently in your Substack.
Yeah.
You wrote about the power of AI. You said we are still profoundly underreacting. We are dangerously underprepared. Explain, as you're looking at AI right now, I'm curious about the potential for the use of AI within government, potentially to, as you talked about rebuilding things for this century and technology, but your genuine concerns. How are you concerned about how the government is underreacting here? And curious, by the way, what was done during the Biden administration in regards to that.
Yeah. So, we did a lot of work on this. I remember convening a group at the Department of Transportation and, jokingly saying, like, why don't you have ChatGPT write us an AI strategy and see how it comes out? And somebody actually did, and it actually looked pretty good. But of course, all it was doing was drinking what it could off the internet and kind of rearranging it. But look, I think there's a ton of potential. The potential to reduce car crashes at a time when we have 40,000 people a year dying in car crashes, same as gun violence.
Are you a big advocate for self-driving cars? I mean, do you think that'll be a huge game changer?
I think it can be, yeah. I know there's skepticism, and I understand the skepticism. But as somebody who was a tough regulator of that stuff, I actually think at the end of the day, it absolutely has the potential to have a dramatically better safety record than human drivers who kill about 100 to 150 people a day on our roads. So think about that. Like 40,000 people a year die with human drivers. Cutting that in half is absolutely possible through technology. So whether it's that or cancer research or climate change or getting nuclear fusion, like some of the things that AI can do are incredible. At a day-to-day level, AI could mean that we all have a shorter work week and more money in our pocket, but only if the policies make sure it unfolds that way. The other thing that could happen is AI means even more power and even more wealth goes into even fewer hands because getting a job and working in that job matters less and less in our society relative to owning the software or the intellectual property or the equipment that powers this very powerful AI. So the reason I think we're underreacting is I think a lot of things are changing quicker than people realize. If we wake up one day and 40% of the entry level jobs are just gone in a field like at a place like McKinsey, a management consulting firm, or an architecture firm, or a hospital or law firm. Interestingly, by the way, these are more white collar jobs than building and construction trades that are getting automated. I used to think of that as something we might have to worry about by the time my kids are contending with their careers in the 2050s. Now I think it's on us right now.
Yeah, we had one of the head futurists at Bank of America on talking about agentic AI, and he's like, "This is not even a matter of years; it could be months where we start to see, if there's a breakthrough." I mean, it's incredible talking about ChatGPT because we're really 3 years into it as we speak here in terms of where it was, where we're going, and there could be a huge breakthrough there. And then you're talking about people who've invested a lot in college educations, who's can't break through into the industry. It sort of reminds me of the sort of Arab Spring in Egypt, where like they had one of the more educated societies. A lot of people, the whole, deal under Mubarak is, oh, we'll send you to college and then we'll get you master's degrees. And they're all coming out and they didn't have jobs and, they had a revolution there.
Right. Look, if you have a lot of energetic, educated young people and nothing to do, that is a perfect recipe for instability. And I would add to that, even if we can figure out how to make sure people get their incomes replaced, which is possible in theory, but doesn't mean it'll happen. Even if we solve that, there's a whole other set of issues around where people fit in society. And I witnessed a version of this growing up in northern Indiana in the industrial Midwest, when things like free trade and automation, those waves of change came through in the 90s. And what happened then, and even though that was a smaller development than AI, it was catastrophic for a lot of people and a lot of families, a lot of communities where I lived. What I saw was even if some retraining program or workforce program figured out how somebody who had worked in a tool and die shop or as a machinist and was suddenly out of work could get income, it didn't have a lot of good answers on where they fit. What you do, whether you, especially if you're white collar, actually even more for white collar workers than for a lot of blue collar workers, the first thing you say when you're at a party trying to make small talk is, what do you do? It is not just how we make money, it is where we fit, who we are. You disrupt that, and you have to have some responses on what happens next. By the way, there are responses that are available. Many of them are more conservative coded. Um, family, community, faith, national service, country. I don't think that has to be conservative, but I think conservatives talk about it more. And then there's some really ugly answers to that. That if your identity is disrupted, then they say the answer for you is uh, to lean into white nationalism or to make sure you define your identity in terms of who doesn't get to participate or who doesn't belong. You know, some really ugly stuff that happens all the time in countries that go through these kinds of disruptions. Being on top of that set of issues, I think could be the central challenge for any American government for the next 10 years.
Do you think that'll be the leading issue in 2028?
I think it'll be the leading policy problem. I
Yeah.
don't know yet whether it'll be the leading political issue. I don't know whether that's on everybody's minds yet, but that's part of why I wrote this short piece and why I'm writing and thinking more and more about AI is this shouldn't just be a tech thing. They have to be like into tech to care
So,
about
I
it.
mean, does there need to be like a massive government job training program? Like, wait, are you at the point of like figuring out what the solutions might be for this sort of overhaul of society that's about to happen?
Well, I think part of what happens is we need to deal in the American people on the wealth that is being created.
Yeah.
And there are ways of doing that. There are ways of making sure there's some kind of dividend or income or share, whether you do it through taxes or whether you do it in a different, maybe more ownership-based way or entrepreneurial
What do you
way.
make of Trump's, a deal here? He pushed the no taxes on tips, overtime, etc., trying to get at working class voters. I mean, do you think that was a smart move?
I think, yeah, I mean, look, I think he did it for a pretty cynical reason, but yeah, there need to be policies to put more money in people's pockets. Now, I think, especially when you're talking about tipped workers, the first thing that needs to happen is they just ought to get paid more. And I'm skeptical about how many will actually be able to take advantage of those provisions. But yeah, of course, it's the right thing to do to create more of an economic break for working class people. But let's be very clear: the Trump budget was overwhelmingly skewed toward putting more money in the pockets of people who already had the most.
Do you think Democrats are effective in making that argument? Because again, it gets to the previous conversation we were having about the viewpoint that no, you guys are the elites. Like Trump's a man of the people, and the latest polling continues to show that the Democratic Party, even 6 months into Trump, continues to be less popular than the Republican Party.
I think the Democratic Party has gotten in its own way by appearing to be this kind of scolding, kind of preachy voice. So much so that even when we're firing off very accurate criticisms of Trump, people feel like we're actually criticizing them. And it starts to feel like an attack on them that makes them more likely to defend him. Although there are cracks in that, right? I mean, the Epstein thing is a good example where, to me, Trump's decision to block the Epstein files reflects how little respect he has for his own base. Because basically he's saying, all right, you believe me when I told you I was going to release these on day one, and I took your vote and I took your money, and now I'm in. And now, if you still care about this, you're an idiot, right? That's what he's saying. But I think we need to lean in more on the cases where he's the one showing disrespect for his own voters. And we, meanwhile, need to show a little more respect for people who voted that way for whatever reason. Any number of reasons, including a lot of people who didn't particularly like him, but thought that he might make them better off. Let's recognize these as people that we need to invite into our coalition instead of people to wag our fingers at saying you're on board with something evil.
Do you think now looking back, do you think introspectively, you're like, that you were a part of that? Do you feel like messages you've had in the past, like, do you feel like you've learned personal lessons
Yeah,
having watched how the politics have
yeah, you always
evolved?
look. I'd like to think that's been kind of my approach or my tone throughout. But yeah, any given day, I can look back at game tape and say I would have done this differently, or I would have told the story differently, or I could have done more to reach people.
Curious as we talk about, frustration out there, income inequality. Here in New York City, we have a mayoral race. I mentioned you've been following it. Zoran Mani, Democratic Socialist in the city of finance, looks like he might be our next mayor. And he's pushing a number of agenda items where he free buses, city-owned grocery stores, etc. Curious what you make of his win. Do you see it as a warning sign to the party? How do you interpret the embrace of especially young Democrats of Mamdani?
So I think there were three things that were really powerful and really at play here, and everybody's focused on one of them. But I think the other two are more probably more useful or relevant if you're in a very different place than New York. And what I mean by that is, what everybody's noticed is the leftism, right? The Democratic Socialists, the kind of just being ideologically left. I think that's something that shouldn't be so surprising in a primary inside the Democratic Party inside New York City. But that's what everybody's paying attention to. I think that is less instructive if you're trying to win a race where I live in Michigan or in a lot of other places than two other things that he did very effectively. One was this relentless message discipline. My party's not great with message discipline. Sometimes it feels like we're all over the place. He, whether you think his policies make any sense or not, he was always talking about affordability and made it clear that that was what he was about. And affordability is the biggest thing on everybody's minds. Definitely in a place as expensive as New York, but honestly, pretty much everywhere. The ability to afford a home, the ability to afford rent, the ability to afford groceries are on people's minds. And finding a way to just be laser focused on that was, I think, something that wherever whether you're more centrist or more leftist, like anybody in the Democratic Party should be paying attention to. The other thing was just a willingness to get out and communicate in modern ways. What we were talking about earlier, being on the podcast, like being on social media all the time and doing it in a way that was authentic to who he was. Because one thing I've found, especially for reaching anybody kind of our age or younger, left, right, or center, you're going to have a better shot of breaking through if it's clear that you know who you are and are comfortable in that than if it's clear that you're microwaving talking points and bringing them out and hoping they still work.
Are you supporting him for mayor?
I'm a Michigan voter, so
Okay.
I don't like yeah I don't get a vote there. I think that he's going to need to demonstrate that. I think there's a lot of panic in business circles saying is this is this compatible with economic growth in New York City? And I think he's got to answer that if he wants to really bring people together. But I think it can be done.
So, I mean, do you think some of his policies can be effective?
I don't know how workable some of these policies are. I think, if you look at the actual experience of what happens when you try to just um, like set prices, that often winds up unfolding in ways that are not what you had in mind. I'm curious about the grocery thing. I mean, you do have state-operated liquor stores in some places, right? I think groceries are a little bit different, but I'm not sure how much these policies were developed with every particular in mind versus these policies being put out there as a way to make clear what he was. It's kind of like build a wall on Trump's side, right? I don't know how serious Donald Trump ever was about building a wall. He didn't build a wall when he was president, but he said that in a way that signaled to people what he was about. And I think some of these policy ideas have that same effect. How workable they are, I mean, that's
So
something
more
that would have to
symbolic
be
in some
tested.
ways.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure he's serious,
Yeah.
or I imagine he's serious, but are they actually workable? I think there's a lot of questions.
Have you spoken to him?
No.
No. We were talking about young voters, and the numbers are pretty stark in 2024. Biden won young people by 25 points in 2020. Harris eked out a 4-point win in 2024. So a 20-point shift among Gen Z and millennial voters, particularly among Gen Z men. We've seen that shift rightward, and that crosses races, incomes, and that's a vote you once were able to take for granted in the Democratic Party. What's happening there?
Well, that's problem number one, is taking anybody for granted. I think the Democratic Party's learned the hard way that whether we're talking about black voters, Latino voters, young voters, you take anybody for granted, they're going to notice, and sooner or later that's going to cost you. Um, I also think that this hesitation to go to different spaces and to talk openly is especially costly with younger voters. I think there's kind of a risk aversion that somewhere along the line just took hold among Democrats in terms of
Where do you think that comes from?
strategy. I think it comes from the experience of being blown up on digital media or canceled, so to speak, because you put a foot wrong. And it leads to this very human reaction of like, all right, I'm not going to do anything where I could put a foot wrong. And the problem with that is if you really want to talk in a way that you never say anything that'll offend anybody, you're not you're not yourself, and you're not going to sound like a human being, right? Um, Part of why these longer form podcasts. I mean, I did one that was almost 3 hours.
Is it the Andrew
Yeah,
Schultz?
yeah,
Yeah.
flagrant.
I watched a
Um,
bit of it. I couldn't get
okay.
through all 3 hours of it, but
Well, part of why I think those are very effective in making clear what somebody's about is that even if you wanted to be on talking points for 3 hours, that's not possible, right? At some point, you just sink into the couch and you just talk, and you're going to say a couple things that people are going to attack. And I did, like, I got attacked for various like random things that uh, I might have mentioned in passing in a 3 hour show. But if you're not willing to absorb that, nobody's going to hear what you're actually about, especially in the current media environment. And what we're actually about is taking the side of people who need to earn more money, need to be paid better, who need healthcare, who need better protections. And those are exactly the people who are being left behind in a Trump administration that's always, always, always siding with the wealthiest and with corporations against people in the big blockbuster stuff, like the bill to cut Medicaid and give taxes to the wealthy, and smaller things that don't get as many headlines. I mean, one example I think really demonstrates it. Maybe this sounds like a small thing, but in the last administration, the FTC had a rule called click to cancel. What that means is if you ever signed up for something, a subscription, a gym membership, cable, and then you try to cancel it,
make it
it's
impossible.
super easy to sign up. You can sign up with like 2 clicks, and you give them your credit card, and they take your money. And then when you want to cancel it, it's impossible. You got to call this 800 number. You're on hold for 2 hours with the 800 number. Turns out they only answered on Tuesdays, like, right? So there's this rule that said if you can sign up online, you should be able to cancel online. It should be basically as easy to get out of a deal with a corporation as it is to get into one. And the conservatives just got rid of that. So that's just one example.
Right. The industry said it was too tough for them, and so they
Yeah.
said,
So they killed it in court. Passenger protections that I worked on at the Department of Transportation. Now you have a much more pro-airline and less pro-passenger stance. So on issue after issue, whether it's the big stuff like healthcare and taxes, direct file. The IRS was in a process, they were already piloting it to where you could file your own taxes online and not have to pay some kind of middleman to do it. They killed that under this administration. So they've demonstrated again and again and again that they are going to side with big corporations and not with ordinary people. And making clear the stakes of that. That's the kind of message we need to be getting out there, and not tripping over ourselves because we're afraid to go to any spaces where people don't agree with us or where we might get a tough question.
How would you grade Democrats right now, and are you optimistic about midterm elections?
I think my grade would be an incomplete. Like, there's just a lot more to do. I also think it's harder. Look, when you're out of power, it's harder to show how you're going to deal with these things than when you're in, the throes of an election season and then getting ready and then hopefully taking power and being able to show how you do it differently. I think, we have been right to focus on things like the cost that all of us are going to pay for this Trump budget, the way that all of us are paying for these tax breaks for the wealthy. But I think we still struggle as a party to be coherent, cohesive, to have that message discipline we were talking about earlier, and sometimes just to land a punch. I mean, that's why I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about things like the Epstein Files. But I think at this moment where the refusal to be transparent about them tells us something very big about the Trump administration, not just the way that the president is mixed up with Jeffrey Epstein, which we've all known for a long time, but an example of how he comes in and says, I'm going to do this on day one, and then does the opposite in a way that now affects all of us because they shut down the U.S. House of Representatives until September in order to avoid having to vote on it.
I mean,
this gets really real.
Do you think the Biden administration? I mean, President Biden had the ability to release Epstein Files, but he didn't do that.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't know how it worked in the DOJ. Obviously, I was a different side of the house, but this was not like a big thing that Joe Biden campaigned on, right? He didn't go around saying like, "You elect me, and on day one, I'm going to release the Epstein Files." Donald Trump did, and then on day one, he didn't, and now he's blocking them.
You mentioned your time at transportation, aviation, high interest. I mean, we've been watching what's been going on at Newark Airport, air traffic controllers, shortages, pretty dire situation. Several people wrote in saying, I want you to ask Pete why he didn't do more to fix that situation, given what we've now witnessed unfolding this year.
I would argue that I got better results on that than anybody in recent history. For example, the number of air traffic controllers went down and down and down, not just under the Trump administration before me, but for 30 years. It went down. Every secretary
I mean, we're going back
left
to like
with
the
it going
Reagan
down.
administration, basically. It
Yeah.
was sort of like the
Yeah, there
original
was the
sin there,
breaking
right?
the strike. We finally got that number growing again. Did we get like thousands of people? No, because it takes a long time to become an air traffic controller, and you can't exactly rush something that important, right? I mean, you have to go through the training. If that takes 2 years, it takes 2 years because you better know exactly what you're doing. But my point is, we turned it around. We got the number. I was the first, I'm pretty sure I'm justified in saying I'm the first secretary in 30 years to hand his predecessor an air traffic control workforce that was growing and that was not shrinking. On the technology side, I was the one who, it was on my watch that we launched the contract to modernize the communications backbone of the FAA. Again, not something you're going to do in a year because this has to be working 1,000% of the time with 24 by 7 by 365.
In retrospect, do you think you could have done more, or you could have like
We could have done more.
supercharged it? You could have been on TV before
I was on
Congress.
TV. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I was on TV. I was before Congress. We went to Congress and asked them for billions of dollars to modernize the FAA. They sat on it. The budget they just passed is their response to a request I made back back when I was in office. So to say, they come in now and look, I sincerely hope my successor can do what he says he's going to do.
You think Duffy's doing a good job so far?
No, but on this, I would agree. He went to get more money for the FAA, just like I did, and he actually got some from Congress, billions. He admits that it's not enough, but he says he's going to put it to work. I hope he succeeds.
The other, big thing we watched this year, sadly, was that collision in January at DCA between the plane and the helicopter. Probably the worst incident in almost 20 years in terms of casualties here domestically. The NTSB, the reports have now come out that there were 15,000 plus close calls, 85 serious close calls where they literally need to do an invasive procedure. That all happened between 2021 and 2024. How did you handle the situation? How did it get so bad at Reagan?
So we did an industry-wide safety stand down, and that's one of the reasons why the severe close calls went down on my watch. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of different factors that can go into that. It can be pilot deviation, it can be controller error. There's a whole set of things, and it takes usually several of them happening at once for the danger to escalate. The most important thing, or one of the most important things I would point to from our tenure, was that 4 billion people got on or off of an airplane, on and off of an airplane, on a commercial airline flight, and we had 0 crash fatalities.
This is 4 billion in the U.S.
Yeah, just in the years that I was there.
I think that's an important reminder for folks. I mean, especially people who are scared of flying, that like 4 billion people fly, like 1 billion people fly basically every year.
Yeah. No, I don't want to be flip about it, but like statistically, like you or I, like I'm going on an airplane later today. That's probably the safest part of my day. And you and I are both more likely to come to harm at any other point in our day.
Driving to the airport.
Absolutely. Than when we're actually sitting on that plane.
But in terms of kind of looking back at your time, one of the things that we've heard from aviation experts is that the FAA, the government, has been too differential to the airlines, allowing them to keep adding slots, like to the point where like it's ridiculous how many flights are scheduled. Realistically, they can't take off in that time. I mean, do you feel that the government needs to do more to sort of start to, get harder with the industry that has been too deferential to the airlines?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm justified in saying I was the toughest airline regulator to have that job since it was created, or at least in modern times. And there was a lot of blowback on that. I mean, and right now, this administration is moving back in the pro-airline direction, which shouldn't be super surprising. My successor used to be an airline lobbyist. And what you see is, for example, we had a wheelchair rule on how airlines treat passengers who have their wheelchairs destroyed when they're flying. They're walking that back. We'll see what happens with enforcement. We did enforcement on airlines to make sure that they knew they'd be held accountable for things like unrealistic scheduling. Some of those enforcement actions have been canceled. So could we have done even more? I'm open to looking at what more we could have done. But what I know is that we did more than anybody else. And now there's a very different direction.
Couple questions during your time in the Biden administration. Recently, you said the party potentially would have been better off if he didn't run for president. First of all, have you read any of the books that have come out that Jake Tapper
No,
broke?
not really. But yeah, I see the news like everybody else.
Yeah. Curious, especially in that last 18 months, if you witnessed anything that ever concerned you about President Biden.
I mean, I saw what everybody saw. He was old and he was getting older. But in terms of what I needed from him as a boss and as a president to get transportation decisions and to get things done, there was never any moment where I thought, oh, this decision is different or worse, or this process is worse because he's old.
You had access to him as much as you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like when you, I don't know how it works under other presidencies. Generally, it's not like the Secretary of Transportation is like talking to the president every day.
Yeah.
Usually when I was talking to him, it was something really bad had happened, like the Baltimore Bridge. But, I take that example where the Baltimore Bridge collapsed. And whether I was briefing him on the phone or when he was going to the site or when I was in the Oval Office with the Coast Guard and we were kind of working through it, everything I needed to do my job, I could get from him doing his job. But also, like, we all saw the same thing, right? And ultimately, after the debate, it became clear, eventually, even to him, that there had to be a change.
The debate Biden that you saw, you had never seen a Biden like that in private? No. What do you make
But
of
that was also a unique circumstance, right? Like, I'd never seen it. I mean, I debated with him.
Right. Right, in the 2020
technically
primary.
debated against him, right? Probably at least half a dozen times.
So that, I mean, you watch the tape there and you watch Biden in 2020 and you watch Biden, like, that's a different Biden.
I mean, I experienced him as the same human being. But yeah, again, everybody saw that he was old and he was getting older.
But did you have confidence that that he could serve for 4 more years?
I mean, I think by the end of that campaign, by the last month after that debate, I think everybody, including him, however reluctantly, kind of got to the same conclusion. But I can tell you again, as far as being able to do my job and being able to get what I needed from the White House, I got what I needed to do my job.
If you go back in time and do it over again, do you wish that like an intervention had been staged, that the party had been stronger in terms of running other candidates against him?
I mean, in a way, that's what ultimately happened, right? But yeah, it's easy to do coulda, shoulda, woulda. But like, had there been more time for that, had the process gone out differently, would the outcome have been different? It's impossible now to say, even though we have a lot of hindsight.
Yeah, and in hindsight, I want to ask you the famous question Kamala Harris got on The View, where she was asked, and obviously a lot has been made of this, what would you have done different from President Biden? And she said nothing. If I could ask you the same question, how would you answer that?
I mean, you look at the border, and I think inside the administration, we were very reluctant to recognize how much that was on people's minds and why. He did an executive order that worked. I mean, it made a big difference, but that was in year 4. If that had happened sooner, I think that would have made a big difference, both substantively in terms of what was going on at the border and politically. So I think that's one. I think that for very good, understandable reasons, there was such a strong effort to make sure that we prevented any more Americans from dying from COVID than necessary. That meant a downshift on the prioritization of figuring out a safe way to get the schools back open, which again, I talk now to students. I spent time teaching at the University of Chicago this spring and talking to students who had really pivotal years of their lives, 8th grade, freshman year, who are now in college, about just how much that happened, that kind of harmed them to be out of that environment for that long. I think most anybody, including people who are doing a very good job trying to keep Americans safe, but I think most anybody would look at that now and say, we could or should have done more to get those schools safely open more quickly. So with the benefit of hindsight, there's all kinds of things. There's, things I would have done differently too, of course. But I would also say, every day we went to work trying to do the right thing for the American people because we cared about the people who we served. And the most disturbing thing of all to me about the current administration is not that I disagree with them on this or that issue. It's that I don't think the president cares about anybody except himself.
I want to end here with your future. I checked the betting markets this morning.
Uh-oh.
Which, by the way, in 2024 turned out to be more accurate at times than like traditional polling. Right now, in the Democratic primary betting markets, people putting money right now, you're in 3rd place behind Gavin Newsom and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for the Democratic primary. But overall, J.D. Vance is in the lead to be elected president in 2028. In the more traditional polls, you're leading up there. Depending on whether Kamala Harris decides to run again, you're pretty much up there with her. That said, Alice, are you ready to announce your candidacy now for 2028?
Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not ready to make that.
You're not going to do that now.
Today.
All right, so short of that, I'm genuinely curious, and this is a question we got from a number of people in the audience. How does one decide whether to run for president or not. It's clearly a decision you made in 2020,
Yeah.
going to 2020. How do you think about it over the course of the next couple of years?
So the way I've thought about any time I've run for office, when I ran for mayor, when I ran for DNC chair, when I ran for president, also just now when I decided not to run for Senate or for governor, when those seats
Right, in
opened
Michigan.
up in Michigan, there's two things you do. One is you look at the office and what it requires. What does this office in this moment need? So like when I first ran for mayor, it's like, oh, okay, we've had the longest serving mayor in history. He's stepping down. The city feels like it's lost its way to a lot of people. There's a lot of unfair kind of criticism of our city. The office needs these things, which at the time meant, I thought, new generation of leadership, somebody more focused on business development and economic growth and a whole bunch of other things. And then you look at yourself. You say, what do I bring to the table? And you see if there's a match. Are there things that I bring to the table that's not like the others, that uniquely respond to what this office needs in this moment? And sometimes you look at that and there's a fit. I never really thought I would be running for chair of the DNC until I unsuccessfully ran for that. But the reason I did was I saw that my party was out of step with local leadership, struggling in the Rust Belt and not connecting with the new generation. I thought, well, I'm a young mayor from the so-called Rust Belt. Like, I could do something here, right? You see a fit. And I think that's the best way to decide to run for office. It's the best way to decide not to run for office. It's a deeply personal decision, but it's also very much a decision about where the world is.
On the pendulum, are you closer to running than not running?
It's 2025. I'm like very much not in the mode of running that kind of decision process right now.
And as you think about it, we've seen first in presidential politics. In 1960, it was, is America ready for a Catholic president? And JFK was able to win. Then the question in 2008, is Obama ready? Are we ready for a black president? And Obama won. Right now we had Clinton lose in 2016, Harris lose in 2024. There's still a pending question about, is America ready for a woman president? And in your case, an LGBT president. How do you think about that? And what do you make of, what's your feeling out there in America?
Honestly, I think the best way to think about that is not to, just because there's only one way to actually find out. And every one of those barriers has been a barrier until it wasn't. So there's a way to get in your own head and overthink this stuff. I think in the end, and this was my experience, again, as mayor of a socially conservative but Democratic leaning city in Indiana, in Mike Pence's Indiana, right? When I ran for reelection after I came out, had no idea what that would mean, what that would do to my career. I just was ready to live a normal life, and wound up getting more votes than before because people saw what I was doing for them. I don't think they cared one way or the other. They just wanted to know that I was going to keep fixing the streets and improving the economy and doing all the things that I promised I would do the first time I ran for mayor. And I really believe that the American people will look, if you communicate in the right way, that the American people will look first and foremost not at you, but at what you will mean to them in terms of their lives.
Pete, it's been great chatting.
Same here.
Thank you.
Thanks.